Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something kind of interesting.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at the world of podcasts for learning English.
Okay.
But the thing that makes this one pretty cool is that the main source we're using is actually a YouTube description
Oh, wow.
for an English learning podcast.
So meta.
Yeah, it's like a podcast episode about a podcast.
I like it.
But it's really fascinating, and one of the first things that kind of jumped out at me was
Yeah.
just the sheer number of keywords and hashtags that are packed in here.
Right. Like they're really trying to hit every possible search term.
Yeah, and it gives us a really interesting glimpse into how these creators are trying to get their podcast out there
Definitely, yeah.
to attract listeners and everything.
It's like we're getting a behind-the-scenes look at their marketing strategy.
Absolutely. And right away, they describe their podcast as easy, fun, and engaging.
Okay.
And I don't know about you, but I feel like that's a pretty clear sign that
Yeah.
they understand that learning a language can be
Intimidating for some people.
intimidating. Thank you. Yes.
Absolutely.
Like they're trying to put potential listeners at ease.
Right away, make them feel comfortable.
Exactly. So it's like, come on in, the water's fine.
Yeah.
It's easy, it's fun, it's engaging.
That's smart.
And then they go on to highlight that it's a unique podcast series.
Oh, interesting.
And that made me wonder if they're trying to set themselves apart from
All the other?
all the other English learning podcasts out there.
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
Right. Like, what could be so unique about this one?
Yeah. What's their special sauce?
Exactly. And then they lay out some pretty comprehensive learning goals.
Okay.
They talk about vocabulary expansion, improving listening skills,
Of course.
and building speaking confidence.
That's important.
So do you think that suggests a multifaceted approach?
Yeah, it definitely sounds like they're trying to cover all the bases
Right.
and appeal to a wide range of learners.
Instead of just like focusing on one very specific thing.
Exactly. They're not just a grammar podcast or a pronunciation podcast.
Okay, whole shebang.
To the whole package, yeah.
And they also promise valuable lessons, practical tips, and fun conversations.
Okay.
So it seems like they're aiming for that balance of
Yeah.
structured learning,
Right.
but also like keeping things light and entertaining,
That's important.
because who wants to listen to a boring language lesson?
Nobody. You got to keep people engaged.
Exactly. And speaking of keeping people engaged, let's talk about that massive list of keywords and hashtags.
Oh, yeah. We have to dive into that.
It's like they try to include every single possible search term.
I know. I was thinking the same thing.
Related to learning English,
Yeah.
it's a little overwhelming, honestly.
It's a lot. It's like they threw everything at the wall and hoped something would stick.
Right. Like, do they really need to include every single variation of Learn English or English podcast?
Well, from an SEO perspective, it might seem a bit much.
Okay.
But remember, they're trying to get noticed in a very crowded online space. True. So they want to make sure that their podcast pops up,
Yeah.
no matter what someone types into the search bar.
So it's not just about getting any listener.
Right.
It's about attracting the right listeners.
Exactly. The people who are specifically looking for what they offer.
And by using both those really broad terms
Yeah.
and some more specific keywords, they're kind of casting a wide net
Mm-hmm.
while also targeting those niche audiences.
I like that analogy, casting a wide net.
It's like they're fishing for English learners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they've got all sorts of bait.
And speaking of specific keywords, they're really emphasizing IELTS preparation.
Okay.
I mean, they've got hashtags like hashtag English podcast for IELTS and hashtag DILT speaking.
So they're definitely targeting people who are getting ready for that exam.
So it seems like they're trying to capture both a general audience, but also those who have that very specific goal of taking the IELTS.
It's a smart strategy. They're diversifying their potential audience
Yeah.
and making it clear that they offer something for everyone.
But then you've also got hashtags like hashtag English speaking practice,
Okay.
hashtag English lesson, hashtag best podcast for learning English,
Right.
which seem to be geared towards like
A much broader.
anyone who just wants to learn English.
Yeah. Like they're hedging their bets a little.
It does feel like they're trying to appeal to everyone.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be a problem?
It's possible. I mean, it's great to have a wide reach,
Yeah,
but it's also important to have a clear identity.
right.
You don't want to get lost in the noise.
So maybe they're still figuring out their niche,
Could be.
or maybe they're intentionally trying to be like
Yeah.
a one-stop shop for all things English learning.
It's hard to say for sure without actually listening to the podcast.
Right.
But it definitely raises some interesting questions.
Absolutely. And then there are those location-based hashtags.
Oh, yeah. Those were interesting.
Like they mentioned Denmark, Germany, Switzerland,
Canada.
Australia.
They're not just thinking locally.
Definitely not. They're going global.
So that makes me wonder.
Are they tailoring their content to appeal to learners from different regions?
It's a possibility.
Like maybe they incorporate cultural references?
Or address language learning challenges that are specific to certain countries.
I mean, that would be a really smart way to stand out from the crowd.
Right. Instead of just being another generic Learn English podcast.
They're offering something more personalized and relatable.
Exactly. Something that speaks directly to the needs of their target audience.
It's incredible how much we can learn about a podcast just from this YouTube description.
Yeah, it's like a little treasure trove of information.
It's like a window into their strategy and their target audience.
And it makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden within those keywords and hashtags.
Definitely. There's so much more to explore.
I can't wait to dive deeper.
Me too. Let's keep digging. So we've talked about all these keywords and how they're trying to reach this global audience.
Right.
But do you think there are any downsides
Oh, that's a good question.
to having all these keywords? You know, like being super targeted?
I mean, it's definitely a double-edged sword.
Okay.
On the one hand, all those keywords can help them get noticed,
Mm-hmm.
but it could also make it harder for them to establish, like,
Yeah.
a strong brand identity.
Yeah.
You know, if they're trying to be everything to everyone,
Yeah.
they might end up being nothing special to anyone.
It's like they get lost in the shuffle.
Exactly. It's like trying to be a jack of all trades.
And master of none.
Right. You need to stand out.
Yeah. You need to offer something unique.
That's what makes people come back for more.
And that brings us back to that phrase they use.
Oh, yeah.
Unique podcast series.
I'm curious what they mean by that.
Me too. Like,
Yeah.
what could they do to really set themselves apart?
Well, they've already mentioned some things.
Yeah.
Like targeting a global audience,
Mm-hmm.
appealing to learners with different needs.
Right.
Maybe they could incorporate more authentic cultural elements.
Oh, I like that.
Or address those language learning challenges that are specific to different regions.
Mm-hmm. Like a podcast that explores English idioms through the lens of different cultures.
Exactly. Or one that features interviews with English learners
Wow.
from all over the world.
That would be so cool.
Right. It would make the learning process so much more immersive.
And it would help listeners connect with the language on a deeper level.
For sure.
But I think there's more to it than just the content.
Okay.
I think the tone and style of the podcast are also really important.
Absolutely. You could have the most amazing content in the world,
Right.
but if the host sounds boring or uninterested,
Nobody's going to listen.
exactly. You got to keep people
You
engaged.
can make them feel like they're part of a conversation.
Right. It's like the difference between reading a textbook
Yeah.
and having a chat with a friend,
One is informative.
but the other is fun and memorable.
So do you think there are any clues in this YouTube description
Let's see.
about their tone and style?
Okay, so they describe their content as fun conversations,
Okay.
which suggests a more casual and conversational approach
Like-
rather than like a formal lecture.
So they're going for that friendly and approachable vibe,
Definitely.
which is great for learners who are intimidated by traditional language learning methods.
For sure.
But wouldn't that make it harder to cover complex grammar concepts?
Ooh, that's a good point.
Or like really nuanced aspects of the language?
It's a balancing act for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
You want to be accessible,
Mm-hmm.
but you also don't want to oversimplify things.
So how do you think they might strike that balance?
Well, they could use storytelling or humor
Okay.
to illustrate grammar points,
That's clever.
or they could break down complex topics
Yeah.
into smaller, more digestible chunks.
Bite-sized pieces of information.
Exactly, and they could use real-life examples and anecdotes.
So it's not just theoretical.
Right. It's something that people can relate to.
And remember
Mhm.
and use in their own lives.
Exactly. That's what makes learning stick.
Okay, so we've talked about content,
Yeah.
tone, and style.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the format and structure of the podcast?
Oh, that's important too.
How do they keep listeners coming back for more?
Well, they could have recurring segments
Okay.
dedicated to different aspects of language learning,
Like what?
like vocabulary building,
Mm-hmm.
pronunciation practice,
Right.
grammar explanations.
So it's like a variety show for English learners.
Yeah. A little something for everyone.
But with a clear structure.
Right. So people know what to expect.
And they could even incorporate listener feedback
Oh, that's a great idea.
or questions into the show.
Yeah, make it interactive.
And speaking of interactive,
Mm-hmm.
what about social media?
Oh, that's huge these days.
How do you think they're using social media?
To connect with their listeners.
Yeah.
Well, they could be sharing snippets of their podcast,
Okay.
behind-the-scenes content.
Like bloopers?
Exactly. Or they could be engaging in discussions with listeners,
Ooh.
answering questions, getting feedback
It's like building a community
around the podcast.
and making learning English a more social experience.
Exactly. Because language is all about communication.
Right.
It's not just about memorizing rules.
It's about connecting with others.
Hearing ideas.
And expressing yourself.
That's what makes it so powerful.
But even with the best content and the most engaging format,
Yeah.
I think there's one more element that's crucial for success.
What's that?
Inspiration.
Ooh, I like that.
You need to inspire your listeners.
To make them want to learn.
To ignite that passion for language.
Because without passion,
It's just not going to stick.
exactly, you need that fire in your belly
To keep going.
to keep pushing yourself.
And to embrace the challenges of learning a new language.
Because it's not always easy.
But it's so rewarding.
When you finally start to understand
and communicate
and connect with others.
on a deeper level.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
You know, it's funny. We started this whole deep dive
Yeah.
by looking at these keywords,
Right.
which are like so technical.
Yeah, they're not very human.
But our conversation has really shifted towards the more human side of podcasting.
Definitely.
The passion,
Right.
the connection,
Right.
inspiration.
I think that's what makes a podcast truly successful.
And going back to those keywords,
Yeah.
I think they actually do tell us a lot
Okay.
about the creator's intentions
Right.
and the audience they're trying to reach.
It's all there if you know how to read between the lines.
Let's look at those location-based hashtags again.
Okay.
Like Denmark, Germany, Australia.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how they could tailor their content to different regions.
Yeah.
But what are some other ways they could leverage this global focus?
The one thing that comes to mind is incorporating different accents and dialects into the podcast.
Well, that's a great idea.
Like imagine hearing different pronunciations and regional expressions.
It would expose listeners to the richness
Yeah.
of the English language.
Exactly. It's not just one way to speak English.
Right.
There are so many variations out there.
And it would help learners develop a more nuanced understanding of spoken English.
Absolutely. It's about going beyond textbook English.
Yeah, like real-world English.
Exactly. The kind of English you hear
Yeah.
in everyday conversations.
Oh, wouldn't that be a challenge?
To manage all those different accents,
Yeah.
it definitely could be.
Like logistically?
You'd need to find speakers from different regions.
Right.
Or maybe use audio clips from authentic conversations.
So it's not just the hosts
Yeah.
putting on different accents.
Exactly. It needs to be genuine.
Okay, so we've got the accents.
Yeah.
But what about the cultural challenge?
Oh, that's another important aspect.
Faced by learners from different backgrounds,
Right.
how could they address that?
Well, they could create episodes
Yeah.
dedicated to exploring cultural idioms and
Okay.
expressions.
So it's not just about the words themselves,
Well,
it's about understanding the cultural context.
Exactly. Because sometimes the literal meaning
Yeah.
is very different from the intended meaning.
And they could also talk about cross-cultural communication.
Yeah, like how to avoid misunderstandings
Mm-hmm.
when interacting with people from different cultures.
So it's not just about learning the language.
Right.
It's about learning how to use it
In a culturally sensitive way.
effectively.
Exactly. It's about becoming a global communicator.
And that brings us back to that idea of balance
Oh, yeah.
between broad appeal
Mm.
and niche targeting.
It's a tricky balance to strike.
But I think they're on the right track.
Yeah, by addressing these specific cultural nuances,
Mhm.
they can create a podcast that feels
Yeah.
personalized and relevant to a global audience.
It's like they're creating a custom-made suit
Okay, I like that.
for each listener.
It's tailored to their individual needs.
But even with the best content
Mm.
and the most targeted approach,
Yeah.
there's one more thing that's essential.
What's that?
Inspiration.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to inspire your listeners.
To make them believe in themselves.
Yeah, to ignite that passion for learning.
Because learning a new language,
Mhm.
it's a journey.
It's not always easy,
There are ups and downs
but it's so worth it.
when you finally start to see the results
And connect with others.
on a deeper level.
So what makes an English learning podcast truly exceptional?
I think it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Thoughtful content,
Mhm.
engaging style,
Right.
deep understanding of the audience, and most importantly,
Yeah.
a genuine passion for helping others learn.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what final thoughts
Mhm.
would you leave our listeners with?
I would say this. As you explore the world of English learning podcasts,
Yeah.
remember that language is more than just words and grammar.
It's a tool for connection,
for understanding,
for growth.
Choose podcasts that inspire you,
Challenge you,
and make you excited to learn.
And remember, the journey is just as important as the destination.
Embrace the process.
Celebrate your progress.
And never stop exploring the wonders
of the English language.
That's it for this deep dive.
But the conversation doesn't end here.
Keep exploring.
Keep discovering.
And keep connecting with the world.
Through the power of podcasts.
Until next time.
Happy listening.